Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. This is our second of two opportunities to give input on downtown Civic Park. Our first opportunity was virtual, had a little bit of a COVID effect to it, but we're happy to be in person tonight. The individuals seated up here on the dais with me are all members of the Citizens Committee that is overseeing what I would refer to as the feasibility study of the downtown Civic Park, working with our consultants. I am by no means the chair of this group, but I'm happy to help lead and moderate the discussion tonight. A couple of things I want to talk about before we get started. First, I've even engaged a couple of folks on this. I've seen some chatter on social media. There's been no discussion about how this park, if we move forward with it, would be funded. So I know there's some ideas that it's coming out of the general fund or property. None of that has been decided. All premature. So it's probably not relevant to have a discussion about funding at this point. On the politics of this, that's a council discussion. Keep in mind, we've got our consultants here, and this committee did not make the decision to initiate this feasibility study, but certainly the council felt like it was an important step to take in anticipation of the decision to move forward with the park. So here's our format tonight. We're going to first hear from our consultants this evening are here in town with us. Elaine Kearney with TBG Partners and her associate Austin Hicks are here. She's going to go through a brief presentation. We're going to spend a few minutes for Q&A if you want to walk up to the mic and ask any questions. I've already done one of these. I found like it was more productive once we got past that point that we got through to the mingle one-on-one Q&As in front of the boards out in the lobby. And so we'll try to watch the time on that and make sure that we get an appropriate time out in the lobby to work with the boards and to speak to everybody on a one-on-one basis. So without any further delay, I'm going to call on Elaine and have her move through her presentation, and then we'll go from there. Elaine? I believe your mic should be on.
All right, we'll give it a test. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you so much, Mayor Pro Tem, for the introduction, and it's so nice to see faces, real live faces here this evening. Like many of you, we've been stuck in the Zoom world, so it's wonderful to be able to engage directly with you all. There's just no substitute for that. And also, it's a beautiful evening, so thank you for coming indoors. So before I launch into the new design concepts, I'd like to give just a little bit of background. Some of you may have been tracking this project the entire time. For some of you, this might be the first introduction to it. So I'll try and go kind of quickly through it, but just so you have a little bit of history on how this whole idea for the Civic Park came to be. Then I'll walk you through the three concepts that we have at the moment. And we'll talk to you a little bit more about our outreach strategy. And then, as Mayor Pro Tem Massengill mentioned, we'll have time for some Q&A. And we've also brought printed versions of most of the material that you'll see, which are out in the lobby. So we'll do a little fun red dot, green dot exercise so that you can leave your feedback in real time. So again, my name is Elaine Kearney. I'm a landscape architect, and my colleague Austin, why don't you wave? He'll be manning the boards with me as well, so you can pigeonhole either of us this evening. I do want to acknowledge the rest of the team. We're definitely not doing this in isolation. We have the great pleasure of having a good number of local Lubbock consultants on our team, and they've been really invaluable for helping us to understand the local context. We also have some experts behind us that are helping us with some of the really specific issues. One I want to mention in particular is Samantha Schwartz with Overland. She unfortunately got caught up in the bad weather and her flight was delayed yesterday, so she wasn't able to make it, but Samantha represents a real continuity with the master plan team. We've been working jointly with her here in Lubbock since at least 2019, so I do see some familiar faces in the room at this point. I'd also like to, of course, acknowledge all of the elected officials and also the TIF board, which funded this particular conceptual study. And then, of course, to our wonderful advisory committee, a good number of which are sitting behind me. They've been fantastic. They represent a great cross-section of Lubbock, and they've been a sounding board for us every step of the way. They've been very kind to join many Zoom calls with us and give us a heads up about things that they think that will be important to the community, sticky points, concerns, so really appreciate them along the way. So just a little bit of context on how the idea of a civic park came to be. It really began with the downtown master plan update process. The goal of which was to think about ways to, there's so many wonderful things that are happening in downtown Lubbock, but ways that we could even build upon that momentum to have more people spending time downtown, more businesses thriving, more activity. In that process, we were looking at the existing zones and key zones of downtown Lubbock, including the Arts District, the Depot District, and the very critical Broadway corridor. And one of our tasks was to think about what could be some of the catalytic projects along that corridor that could start to spur even more activity. There were a couple of ways that we thought about doing that, and these are sort of highlighted on this slide. So the first was thinking about how can we activate streets for people. The right-of-way is quite large in Lubbock, which means that you have a lot of real estate there. We talked about concepts like street cafes, more street trees, furnishings, et cetera, that can really make it a lively and comfortable place for people to be. As part of that strategy as well, to think about filling in the block. So what we mean by that is that there's some great pieces of architecture that are unfortunately a little bit underutilized right now. They may be vacant or not completely filled. So taking the great activity that's already happening and filling in those missing pieces. And then finally, the idea of a civic heart, if you will, a living room for all of downtown Lubbock came up. And that's because when we began to look at all of downtown, we realized that there was very little green space. I understand you have a new tornado memorial that just opened, which is beautiful, which is a wonderful addition. But in terms of a place where citizens could gather, where you could have those moments together that are really meaningful to the identity of a city, we saw that that was an opportunity that could be filled. And that really, I think, to me, parks are probably one of the single best examples of the triple bottom line. That means something that is good for the environment, it's good for people and the social network, and it also brings positive economic benefits. So I just pulled this up as a quick case study. There are a lot of people smarter than me with advanced economic degrees that have done in-depth economic analyses. And what they've found is that parks can really contribute to this triple bottom line. And I pulled this example. This is Wayne Ferguson Plaza in Louisville. And I thought of particular interest was the economic note here, that the park contributed to a 57% increase in the total assessed value of adjacent parcels versus only 23% for those not immediately adjacent to a park. In terms of phasing, the park quickly rose to the top as one of the ideas that could be most catalytic for this transformation of downtown, which could, over time, begin to stitch together the different districts and create a very vibrant and interconnected network for downtown. So that was sort of a long-winded way of bringing us to where we are today. Post-master plan, we were hired to be consultants to do this feasibility study to look into what would it mean to do a civic park? What would be the types of amenities? Understand rough order of magnitude, what could be a budget for something like this. So we had our first public input period in March, and we gathered some great survey data from that, although unfortunately it did at that time have to be online. So this brings us to our second engagement period, and I'm so happy to see all of you here. As you know, we're doing this in person, but we are again offering the online version for those who couldn't make it. And hopefully you've seen that we have printed versions of those surveys, so you're welcome to fill those out and leave those with us. And please help spread the word as well for those who couldn't be here in person. What we anticipate is that after the conclusion of this part of the process, we'll take the best ideas and we'll be combining them into one preferred concept, which we will bring to City Council. That is the end of our current contract. So we'll be ending with a conceptual plan. Next steps will be in the hands of your elected officials to decide what will happen beyond that. So I'd like to just give you a brief overview of what we learned during the first public engagement period. We brought forward a very simple, almost a diagram brought to life of what a civic park could be. And I think that's kind of an important distinction to make, because when we say the word park, many people, myself included, it might first come to mind your typical large, green, rolling neighborhood park where you go to toss a Frisbee. This is a little bit of a different animal. I like to think of it almost like an outdoor community center or a living room. This is a place that is much more urban, compact, highly programmed. As you can see from this image, the idea would be to have events on practically a daily basis. Concerts, movies, fitness, large concerts, food trucks, market stalls. So it takes active management, but the idea behind it is that it becomes a destination. It's a place where you go to kind of people watch, grab lunch. You know that the big Christmas tree lighting or the ice skating rink in the winter is going to be here. It becomes an identity for the whole city. So we got pretty good feedback, I think, considering that it had to be online from this. We had about 14,000 people visit the website. Over 1,000 people took our design survey, and it has kind of a fun interactive component. So we had about 345 people actually leave specific comments on the plan about what they liked, didn't like, or had questions about. So this is what we learned from that survey. The top design priority, which is 100% in keeping with the concept of a civic park, was to have lots of year-round activities. That it should be inclusive and engaging for everyone, that it should also be beautiful. And then shade and comfort, very important in this climate to make sure that it's usable as many days out of the year. The most important features that people wanted to see were restrooms, followed by shade structures, a multi-purpose event lawn, and an interactive water feature or splash pad. And I have to say that many of the write-in comments were around that fourth item. A lot of people mentioned how much they would love to have a family-friendly destination in downtown, and that water would be one of the best ways as a free activity to draw kids and families. The most appealing events were pop-up events, so things like a farmer's market or vendors, seasonal events, food and beverage, and then small concerts and movies in the park. We've also worked closely with Colby and the Parks Department to understand and make sure that any concepts we put forward are really feasible and fit with their management structure. And we had some great conversations with them about how they would anticipate programming this on a daily basis, on sort of a monthly basis, and even an annual basis. And what we learned is that there's kind of a sweet spot of events that range from about 750 to 1,000 people. So that might be, a neighborhood concert or a movie in the park. So thinking about the power infrastructure, restrooms, and stage that can all kind of support that regular activity Also being flexible enough to allow, maybe there's 1 or 2 times a year a headliner that comes into town, that you could also accommodate that. So now you're all caught up, and we can get to the fun part. Once we had all that information, we thought, okay, that's a lot of data, but to design a great park, you have to bring soul. And it needs to speak to the soul of Lubbock. So we took a step back, and we were really inspired by the landscapes and what's unique about this part of the world. We looked at the 1 mile by 1 mile grid, which defines the city of Lubbock, and the very regular blocks, which are a wonderful size for walking. I know every time I fly in or drive in, I see the circular crops that are irrigated with a pivot irrigation, very unique feature to this part of the world. And my personal favorite, the playa lakes. Understanding the geology of the way that hydraulic system works, that they fill up and then they drain again through evaporation, is really fascinating. And that's something that you don't really see anywhere else. I mean, I know that I've just really become fascinated with that. And I think it's an amazing story that could be told. We also know that it can be windy here. It can be chilly here. It can be very hot here. And all of those climate features are things that can and should, I think, influence the architecture of the structures that could be in the park. Whether those are lightweight shade structures or, the stage backdrop, they can really begin to create a unique character and identity. And as we mentioned before, that could translate into the restrooms, porches, and even stages. I won't go into these in detail, but just to let you know that there are a lot of great examples of civic parks. Many of you, I know in your travels, have been to some of these: Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, Discovery Green in Houston, and they're super fun, exciting places. So we looked at some of those to understand what they did, how were they able to create multifunctional spaces, and what were the appropriate sizes for the different elements. So these are just some of the parks that we studied in our benchmarking. Some really neat ideas about even informal amphitheaters. So that led us to some aha moments in terms of how to organize the park. This diagram that you're seeing up here was the very first concept that we put forth in the first round of public engagement. And you can see in terms of its overall organization, the stage was oriented onto the east side, facing onto a large flexible event lawn. And if you can imagine, apologies, this map should have had a little bit more extense, but Broadway's to the north, 13th is to the south, and then the First United Methodist Church would be off on the left-hand side of the screen to the west. You can see that we did have a water play element in that, but it was fairly small, and it was tucked up close to the urban streetscape on Broadway. And the one thing that we really learned from that survey is that people value this to be a family-friendly destination. And I started thinking about, I have youngish kids, and thinking about as a mom, what you want to be really careful of is to feel like you can relax and know that your kids aren't going to run into the street. So we thought, maybe having that close to Broadway isn't the best place. Perhaps it would make more sense to think of the entire western side of the park next to adjacent to the First United Methodist Church as our family-friendly zone, in part because that street could be closed off from time to time in order to make that even safer so that you could flow back and forth. We know that the church, obviously on Sunday mornings and during funerals, events like that, is going to need that street to be open. But it could have removable bollards so that it could kind of flex into what we're calling a festival street. So that led us to a little bit of rearranging, which you'll see in the coming concepts. So in one of the organizational strategies, the stage has moved to the south side of the park. That means that you're a little bit further away from the traffic noise of Broadway, and there would be the potential advantage of loading off of 13th Street, which is a much quieter street. Almost in all of the schemes, we've been looking at the food truck infrastructure on the eastern side of the park. That's because there are a lot of people who work in this building, for example, who are just, a block or two away. And it would be a really great place to be able to go down and grab some lunch. So we're showing parking for at least 6 food trucks on those edges, and that would have built-in power so that they don't have to run those obnoxious generators. The second scheme that you see takes almost kind of the mirrored approach, where it brings the stage onto the Broadway side, and it combines that stage with some kind of to-be-determined but striking, iconic architectural structure. And so in this instance, I think the big advantage is that everyone drives up and down Broadway, and you'd have the chance to see this thing lit up at night. It becomes an instant icon for the city. And it would be a fabulous backdrop. Just imagine, a big concert, and you see this cool thing kind of lit up behind it. So I'll launch into the concepts now, so you can see them a little bit more closely. So the first concept that we're bringing is called the field. We've named it that because it takes a much more linear, rectilinear kind of approach, almost like, the tilled crops of a field. But it also fits in really nicely with the grid of downtown. So it has a little bit more of that urban feel to it. You can see, I'll kind of walk you around the park. So on that same concept, you see the family-friendly edge there on Avenue M. Those series of little white boxes represent like little pop-up festival tents. So those might not be there all the time, but it would be a great place for them to set up when an event is happening. Number 3 would be our interactive water feature. And we're calling that the Playa Play. So the idea there is that it's loosely inspired by the Playa Lakes. They could be very shallow basins that would kind of, and by shallow, I'm just a few inches, that could kind of pulse with water in a kind of fun, random way, so kids could, almost like puddle jumping, splash from one to another. But it could be a way for parents or educators to help them understand what a unique system and worthy of protection the Playa Lakes are. Just north of that would be a large open-air pavilion. It's kind of like a big shade structure with restrooms underneath it. We think that's a nice pairing because you often have, maybe the parents and the grandparents want to be able to sit there and enjoy a drink and keep an eye on the kids that are splashing nearby. Obviously, there's a large central lawn. That's the kind of thing where when there is a big concert going on, you might see it really densely packed with people. But on a typical afternoon, it could also be a place just to bring a blanket or stroll. The stage then is on the 13th Street side. And then up against the Broadway edge, you have kind of a transitional zone. We're showing more trees, maybe some loose seating, and art. So circle number 1 in the corner, we think could be a great place for some public art. Perhaps it is even inspired by the wind. It could be kinetic in nature so that it's kind of an exciting thing to walk through. And we like that corner because it really has kind of a connection to the arts district and would be very visible as you're driving north on Broadway. And then, as I mentioned, the Avenue L side would be really set up for the food experience. So you have some sort of other shade structure or pergola that would allow people to grab a bite, sit there, and even enjoy a concert if you prefer to sit more at the perimeter of the park instead of being right up next to the stage. So that's the first concept. Oh, and this is just a little bit of an enlargement. I've never come across a water feature that's like the Playa Play, so you have to use your imagination a little bit. But the idea that there would be this kind of series of little basins with very shallow water for kids, I think it probably has some kind of jet component to it that turn on and off in a playful way. The second concept we're calling wind and water. So if you were to stand back and squint your eyes, in terms of the placement of the major elements, the shade structures, the stage, it's very similar to the first concept. but the major difference is the expression of the forms. You'll notice right away that it's much more organic, curvilinear. I think it picks up on this idea of the way that wind and water works on the landscape could be an inspiration for the structures themselves. And I think one of the things I like about this scheme is that I feel like while it still offers a really big, nice, flexible lawn, you can imagine that there's lots of nice pockets around the edges where if you're there with a smaller group, you feel like you could kind of colonize an area maybe underneath the trees, number 2, or again in the art zone, which is we've also positioned in the same corner. Even the shade structures themselves could be a little bit more playful. This precedent image in the top corner is from Yanaguana Park in San Antonio, if any of you have been there. And it actually allows vines to grow over it, so you get a little bit of that organic feel as well. Oh, I forgot to say, in that concept, we're thinking that perhaps the water feature in that case is more like a civic fountain. So that's the precedent image that you see here, where there's really hardscape so that they can be turned off at certain times if it's too windy or you have an event going on that you don't want it to compete with. And they could be fun and interactive and even programmed so that they might have lights at night so that when you drive by it looks beautiful. But the key thing there with these types of water features is that there's really no standing water or only maybe a ½ inch or something like that. And then our third concept we've dubbed In Motion. It, as you'll see right off the bat, has this sort of oval, almost circular form to it. And what's a little bit different about this one again is that it really goes all in on having that big iconic moment in the park on Broadway. So, perhaps that piece of architecture is inspired by windmills. We're not exactly sure yet, but the idea behind it is that it could be a shade structure on a typical day, but it also would be the backdrop for the stage. So you can see that in this case, the little dots, which represent everyone out having fun, they're all kind of looking north towards this structure. Then all around the perimeter, we have more of our shade in the scheme is being provided by tree canopy. So lots of pockets for seating. It's really would be, combinations of interesting, might be some pavers, some sidewalk, but you really would be able to walk and, all the way around the entire perimeter of the park, find a great bench or a spot to meet a friend. And again, you'll see the idea of the festival street and the food trucks very consistently from the other schemes. One thing that is a little bit different, though, is just for fun, in this one, instead of the more civic idea of water play, we thought about perhaps we could do something that harkens back to maybe many of you, like me, grew up actually playing in a real creek, throwing rocks, getting dirty. So there could be something that, while a little bit more natural feeling, still offers that a little bit of water for kids to play in. So this is the Dry Creek water feature concept. And I'll just back up for a second so you can see where that is. That would be number 1. So in this case, we're thinking maybe it's sort of a long feature that wraps around that whole family-friendly side of the park, and there's lots of different places for kids to play in it. So I won't go through these in detail, just to give you a little preview of what's outside on the boards. What you'll see is that we have the 3 main concepts set up, and then we also have boards that are sort of themed by the different elements. So we have a bunch of different shade structures together. We have stages together. And what you'll see, there's a table right there at the back by the doors. We have red stickers and green stickers. So you are welcome to put them anywhere you have an opinion. So if there's something you really aren't so sure about, go ahead and put a red sticker on it. If there's something that you love, you can put a green sticker. And we also have some little mini sticky notes. So if you want to leave us more detailed comment or question, feel free to stick those on. So those will be shade structures, stages, amphitheaters, event lawn, and plaza. I'm going to see if Brianna, where did she go? She's going to help me just talk a little bit about how we're getting the word out.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. If I haven't had the opportunity to meet you, my name is Brianna Girardi, and I am the Business Development Director here at the city. And I would be remiss with a room full of people like this. I can only assume that you wouldn't be here if you didn't care about this community and weren't involved in one way or another. And so I'm actually going to make an ask of you all while you're here. We truly value and covet your feedback on this project, whether that's positive or negative. We want to hear the good, bad, and the ugly. And so, as Elaine mentioned, we do have a 2-week open forum website, that's LubbockCivicPark.org, with a survey and some interactive features with each of the concepts that you've seen tonight. And if you grabbed a flyer at the back, that's what you're seeing on that, is information on the website. It went live this morning. We've had quite a bit of interaction today already. So please take as many of those flyers as you would like. If you want an electronic copy of that to share with your friends, with your civic groups, my business card is back there. You're welcome to call me or email me, and I would be happy to send you any of the materials that you've seen tonight. You're welcome to share that as you see appropriate. And we also, with this round of surveys, have a printed version. That's not something that we had last time, but we learned that was something that would be helpful for just to make the survey more accessible. So those are back there as well. Should you prefer to fill out your survey tonight on paper, then you can do that, and I can take those, or you're also welcome to take those and share them with people as well. That survey and site will be open until 5 o'clock on May the 26th, where we will close it very similar to what we did for this first round, so that the consultants have time to process all of that data and bring us our next step in the process. So I will be here for the rest of the night. Again, my cards are in the back, but you're welcome to come find me, ask me any questions, or call me anytime if you have questions about this project. Thanks so much.
So I think that brings us to the open question period. If anyone,
Elaine, if you don't
yes.
mind, let me
Yeah.
just preface before we start Q&A real quick. I know a couple of folks have come in since we started. I made some comments earlier. I know we've had some comments on social media about funding. Again, it's premature to have that debate. The council will have that debate, and it'll be appropriate for you to come speak to the council at that point in time, but we haven't determined what the funding is, if any funding. So if you have any questions about the funding, you might hold them. And then this is not the political body. I just don't want to get anyone confused. This is a citizens group advising our consultants. So if you want to get into the political side of this, again, save it. A couple of the council are here. Maybe the one-on-one outside, we can discuss that. But we're going to spend a few minutes. If you got questions on the mic here, and then we'll break and move out into the lobby. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Elaine.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Elaine, I'm not an architect, but my wife is, and she gives me all this help. But you know, this town has a hell of a lot of parades. It goes up Broadway. And this thing, they don't have any place to, have a picnic or whatever, get fraternity floats.
Thank you. That's great. I think this could potentially be a great place to, I don't know the parade route, so I'll have to pick your brain on that, but, maybe it's a place to. Thank you. Yes, sir.
You've not addressed parking.
Parking, great question. So I was informed this morning that there's a new parking garage going up just a block from here. Do you want to?
Oh, it's right outside that
Right
window.
outside
It's hard to
that
miss.
window, Yeah. So I understand that will be a free public parking garage. So that's about, I guess it's about 2 blocks from the park. The other thing that's happening right now is there is a parking master plan that's just kicking off that will be looking comprehensively at parking needs downtown. We also have had some great conversations with the pastor of the First United Methodist Church, who's been very kind in suggesting that, they own that lot that's kind of southwest kitty corner to the LPNL site, that they might be very amenable to allowing people to use that during the week. Yes, in the back.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. If I can hang on just a sec. We're recording this, so nothing can be heard if you're not on microphone.
I live across the street from a neighborhood park, and I've lived there for 25 years. I'm a great advocate of city parks. Lubbock has one of the most extraordinary city park systems with over 80 parks, maybe 90. And I've been all over the Texas Panhandle, and no town, no city has anything like the Lubbock Park system, and that includes our Lubbock Lakes area. The concerns that I hope you all are considering are those of overnight security. What this park being in the downtown area, I was a member as well of the homelessness committee for the city of Lubbock because we had homeless encampments. And I know homeless people, so I have great empathy with their situation. We may have more of them after COVID-19 is over. So I would be wanting to hear if there's going to be a plan for a 24/7 monitor for this park, well, whether that's an officer, city authority person, because otherwise it will become a magnet for trouble, particularly if there is a bathroom in this park. And one idea I thought of is perhaps this park could be given a different designation. So it's not a city public park. It might be attached to real estate such as the Civic Center Park, so that it does not have to come under all the Chapter 16 park ordinances, because city parks are open officially till midnight. And if there's no oversight or monitor in that park, there will be trouble. Because we've seen it at our park. So I'm delighted to see more green space for the downtown. I even hear there's maybe a dog park in the offing, which thrills me no end. But I did want to address those pragmatic issues because that's the reality. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the comment, and it's one that we anticipated getting. We know that it's a concern that the community has, and it's something that cities everywhere are facing right now. We also have a lot of empathy for those communities, but at the same time, a city park can't be a service place for them. It's not appropriate. So what we've talked about to date, it's complicated, right? There's probably no one silver bullet. We know that there are, however, some things we can do. One of those is to make it as active as possible during the days and hours that it is open, because the more people that are there, that is sort of a built-in set of eyes, that it's going to discourage people from, that may not be the place that they want to choose if they're going to be doing something that they shouldn't be, if there's a lot of people and activities around. So that's one thing, really leaning into the programming component of it. The second is partnering with organizations that we know are active in this space. So we've already had some preliminary conversations with some of the folks who represent, I'm sure, the organizations that you're involved in. We know that we would need to partner with the homeless outreach team. We know that we would need to have very clearly defined park hours and park boundaries in order to be able to enforce that. And then there are design considerations as well. We do know that we need to think very carefully about how things like restrooms are going to operate. Are they going to lock at certain hours? We know that introducing water is something that could potentially be problematic, which is why we're trying to always lean towards things that won't be attractive for bathing, for instance. Also, I think that there's something to be said for a space that is well cared for and has a lot of eyes on it. So There's going to be a lot of more residents coming in as well in the NTS Metro Towers. That's going to be kind of a built-in constituency of people who think of that as their backyard and are going to be protective of it. So that's a long-winded way of saying we hear you, that this is an important issue, and we're trying to be as proactive as we can about the myriad solutions. Well, solution's probably not the right word, but trying to be proactive about addressing that.
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the more people you have in a park does not necessarily equate to better behavior, because I cannot tell you how much alcohol comes into our little neighborhood park. People have ways of disguising it. They're very clever. We've had kegs brought in. We've had, they will walk around with a very tall plastic cup and have a beer can inside of it. And I've cleared out as much as 10 cases worth of beer in the small neighborhood park. And we only have 3 picnic shelters there, but that's how much alcohol will come into that park. So that's why I'm hopeful that there might be a monitor system, maybe just a city authority person, not necessarily a police officer, but someone to just keep an eye on the park to ensure civility and compliance with city ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's certainly a model that's been used in other cities where they, you know, if there's some additional, like a Friends of group that can help to maybe pay for supplemental security. I'd love to chat with you more afterwards, because I think you've probably got a lot of practical insights. I'd love to learn some more. Other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
I don't want to irritate Brianna. She'll just jump all over me. First of all, great job. I must confess, one of these I think is much better than the other two, but I won't.
Don't bias the group.
I will. I know. I'll get in trouble with half this room. But my question, I apologize for coming in late. I've had a crisis or two today to deal with. Did you possibly cover plant material and what trees, plants, and things of that nature that you're thinking? We have an interesting environment out here. When you talk about a breeze, your high wind is our breeze. We make up our rain in 1 or 2, 3 events, lots and lots of water, and then it goes away within an hour or two. Just be curious, and I know this is possibly sort of before some things you may not even want to share with the audience, but I'd be interested. I know there's some really quite beautiful trees on the site right now. Please don't cut them down. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, great question. I think that we are always in favor of trying to incorporate as much native plant material as possible. That being a balance that it has to be maintainable, very sturdy, et cetera. So to be perfectly honest, we haven't gotten to that fine grain of detail yet, but we've heard how important it is to have shade and shade trees. And just this afternoon, Austin and I were walking around the site and commenting on what some of the great trees are that are at the corners in particular that we should be able to keep. It may be also a little premature to throw this idea out, but we think that maybe some of the shade structures could have a rainwater harvesting component. How wonderful would it be if we could say that this lawn is irrigated from some of these major rain events? Like, why let all that water just run down the street when we could try and capture it? So I think that's something we're going to be investigating.
That's great. Thank you so much. By the way, I don't like you because we didn't get the job, but that's okay.
I'll resist that comment.
In addition to Kay's question about some of the trees, for shade in general, just, you know, water availability for people that, you know, in the summer it gets very hot, obviously. What amenities are going to be offered? I'm sorry, I came and I missed the presentation. But.
That's okay. You'll be able to see most of the materials online if you missed it, and we'll be able to provide the presentation. The main priorities that came through the first round of survey was to have restrooms, shade structures, and a stage or amphitheater of some kind. In addition to that, we definitely would think you'd have all of your typical, accoutrements of a park. So benches, water fountains. I'll preemptively answer the dog question because that will probably come up. That we're thinking that this is probably a dog-friendly park, which means you're welcome to come there with your dog on a leash, and we probably have the dog water bowls. But knowing that there is potentially another bigger dog park, a dedicated dog park coming, and just given the size of this, it's actually pretty tiny. You need almost an acre to do a successful dog park, and the site is only 1.8 acres, so it would take up more than half of the site. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, it was in relation to shade and
relation to shade, yes.
Temperature abatement.
Yes. So we heard loud and clear that shade is an important component of the park. So 2 of the schemes actually feature 2 significant shade structures plus a lot of trees, and one of the schemes features 1 pretty large shade structure and even more trees.
I'm not sure if you have an acoustician that's looking at your stage, but I would encourage you to do that. There's a pretty active ballet company here and a symphony orchestra, and I think reaching out to those folks might be informative as to the size of the stage area you might need. I'm sure both of those organizations would embrace the idea of periodically having a performance in the park. Even if that is I know that on the ballet board, the symphony board has thought of a summer program, and that this might be an ideal place to couple with the outdoor, what we call the Bird's Tail at Buddy Holly Hall, to have a really enhanced opportunity for the citizens of Lubbock to come downtown and get together and really have a great time. So I'd encourage you to reach out to those boards. Call me, I'm on both, so I can maybe arrange that.
Okay, perfect. I know whose card to get. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any more hands. One more. There we go.
Before I ask my question, I wanted to second the lady's comments about her concerns in her neighborhood park, because as a neighborhood association official in historic Overton, we have continuing problems at the Overton Park at 14th and T, and I would invite the audience to go by 14th and T at any time and see the seemingly unresolvable problems we have with the homeless in that park and overnight camping. And in fact, the police have had to be very proactive in removing folks from the park after midnight. With that said, I want to ask a question related to something I've encountered all across the community. With the loss of the hundreds of thousands of square feet of usable space with Auditorium Coliseum, which was a city asset that was demolished, there are a lot of concerns about the fact that the old LP&L building and parking garage, which are still very usable, would be demolished in this proposal. And while many folks are not opposed to the idea of a park, they wonder why it couldn't be located 1 block to the east, 1 block to the south. We have so many empty parking lots. Our blocks with structures that could be torn down, like the West Texas Hospital, and try to preserve the 135,000 square feet of usable space that we are going to need for city expansion. You say, well, City Hall is adequate for what we need. We know in the future there will always be need for more space. And the old LP&L building was a usable building until very recently. The parking garage, I see the police going in and out of it at night, so it is a usable structure, which could also be of use to a civic park as well. And just wanted to ask if it could be located somewhere other than demolishing the LP&L building at great expense.
Yeah, thank you for your question. By way of answering that, I can say that as this whole thing is sort of preliminary and conceptual right now, I think and one of the advantages of the square blocks of Lubbock is that hypothetically this concept is fairly translatable to another site. So, none of that's locked in stone yet, but I can tell you why that particular site sort of piqued everyone's interest during the master plan concept phase, and that was for a couple of reasons. One, because it is, when you look geographically at some of these points of interest in downtown that already have a lot of activity, it's almost like you couldn't, if you threw a dart right in the middle, the site is sort of like that missing piece that could kind of connect those dots. It's right on Broadway, so very prominent for a civic park. Also, the LP&L is already owned by the city, which is makes it a little bit easier rather than having to acquire another piece of property. And I mean, I'm not really an expert in this, but I understand that there is significant asbestos in the LP&L building, and having just walked through it, it wouldn't be my first preference for a place to work. I mean, I think it is technically functional, but it's, it maybe hasn't stood the test of architectural time. So anyway, that's a long way of saying, I think, one thing, though, that is intriguing about the building is that it does have a significant basement to it. And we have talked a little bit about whether that could be a place to put some sort of cisterns or rainwater harvesting, just in the spirit of not wanting to, completely do away with something that could have some functional value. But really that overall decision is kind of above my pay grade.
Let's do one more question and then we'll break to move out to the lobby, okay?
Again, I apologize. You opened the door.
Oh, boy.
There's an opportunity. Unfortunately, in Lubbock, Texas, we are lacking green space. Desperately needed. Wonderful place. I think the site's wonderful. Our problem is we want our car with maybe no further than our arm. Oh my gosh, you mean I gotta walk? This is a terrible thing. The parking structure, I believe, does have a basement. Maybe not.
The building, not
okay,
the parking
the building
structure.
has a basement. With a little effort, you could build a one-level parking structure underneath this park. You therefore replenish some of the parking that is lost, which would help spur development in downtown Lubbock, and still have your park too. In other words, have your cake and eat it too. So I throw that out there. I've been known as I'm nuts from time to time. Some people, like Robert Taylor, probably thinks that's the case, but just to put the idea out there, there's an opportunity. Yes, it's going to take some dollars to do, but anytime you want to spur development in any place, the public side of the table needs to many times step forward and infuse dollars into a place to make it happen. So just a thought.
We'll look into it.
And I'll be quiet after this.
Okay, I think at this time we might...
Yeah, you want to go back over the red dot, green dot process here real quick, and then we'll move out into the lobby.
Okay, it looks like the table with the red dots and the green dots have moved out into the lobby. So as you pass through, just pick up some stickers and some stickies and make your way around the boards. We'll be out there, as will, I think, most of the members of our advisory committee, and we'd love to have further one-on-one conversations with each of you. And again, thank you so much for coming out tonight. Your comments are really invaluable.